The previous startup picture showed Jade Sims and myself when we received an exporting award from the US President, handed to us by the US Secretary of the Department of Commerce, and also his tag team partner, the highest ranking trade officer in the country. Jade Sims, now she's a US Commercial Services Officer in Beijing, China, and our team worked on behalf of Michigan State University to help Michigan companies export their products, and in some cases services as well, for more than 10 years. As part of that export work, we had to figure out what target markets were really good for mainly small and medium-sized Michigan companies. We have a lot of small and medium-sized Michigan companies. More than 90% of the companies in Michigan are SMEs. The world is large and the opportunities are great. It all starts with sampling for research and then driving through to the potential target market based on the research results and organizational resources. For this session, we are looking at sampling methods in diverse international markets. There are, of course, challenges, but also strategies related to sampling in diverse international markets. But first, sampling involves selecting a subset of individuals from a population to represent the whole population, allowing for efficient data collection and analysis in the research that we do. It's a crucial process that helps researchers draw conclusions about a larger population without surveying every individual. The importance of sampling in international research obviously cannot be overstated. We see that with election polls and everything else that may be good, bad, or something else. Proper sampling ensures that diverse cultural and demographic characteristics are accurately reflected in the research findings. It also reduces the resources needed compared to surveying entire populations, a consensus, if you will, across multiple countries, making the research more cost effective. The fewer we can have, the better off we are from a cost standpoint. There are two main types of sampling techniques, two overarching techniques, probability sampling and non-probability sampling. And I venture to guess that you've heard and dabbled with both of those, but nevertheless, probability sampling techniques such as simple random sampling and stratified sampling ensure that every member of the population has a known chance of being selected. Non-probability sampling techniques like convenience sampling and quota sampling do not provide known probabilities for selection. However, sampling in international marketing research comes with its own set of challenges. Cultural diversity must be accounted for to ensure that samples accurately reflect the diverse cultural and social context of different countries. Logistical issues such as managing data collection across regions with varying infrastructure and accessibility also pose significant challenges. To address these challenges, several best practices can be implemented. Defining clear objectives is essential for guiding the sampling strategy. Using stratified sampling helps ensure that important subgroups within the population are adequately represented. So I've already sort of given away a little bit of my trade secret. Stratified sampling may be a way to go here, but that's just one of many different sampling things. The other one is conducting pilots. Testing allows researchers to refine sampling methods and address potential issues before the full-scale study. And perhaps as an example of a large multinational company, let's go back to Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola successfully implemented a sampling strategy in their international research by using stratified random sampling. This approach for them ensured diverse representation across diverse or different markets. They conducted pilot tests first in each world region to refine their sampling methods. As a result, Coke achieved a comprehensive set of insights into consumer preferences, leading to successful product adaptation and targeted marketing strategies that increase market share and consumer satisfaction globally. And I keep driving home consumer satisfaction or customer satisfaction as a key metric. It's not always logical or even easy to understand what customers may find valuable. Sampling is a necessary step to ensure that the correct story comes out in the data and the interpretation later on. This video on designing incentives is a bit unusual in terms of the value created for customers, something that can only be gleaned from the data if the sampling includes groups of people who would enjoy the downgrade in this particular case that I talk about in the clip. So let's listen in. The core sampling techniques for me are random sampling, stratified sampling, and cluster sampling. And perhaps via one of those, we could have picked up on the downgrade that actually led to better satisfaction. But nevertheless, those are the methods that form the foundation for all others for me. So I have them at the top, but there are a number of different other techniques. So first, let's discuss random sampling. In this method, each member of the population has an equal chance of being selected. Random sampling is ideal for large homogeneous populations as it ensures an unbiased representation of the population. However, it can be logistically challenging in diverse international settings due to the need for comprehensive population lists and the complexities of accessing all potential respondents, or at least give them an equal opportunity. An example of random sampling is a global online survey for a new product launch where participants are randomly selected from a worldwide database. But again, 195 countries, 62 territories, and so on. We may want to be a little bit more stratified than that. So next we have stratified sampling. This technique involves dividing the population into subgroups or strata based on specific characteristics such as age, gender, income, and so on. Random samples are then drawn from each stratum. Stratified sampling is particularly useful for ensuring that key subgroups within the diverse populations are adequately represented, enhancing the accuracy of the results by accounting for demographic and/or cultural differences that do matter. For example, in an international study on consumer preferences, researchers might use stratified sampling to ensure representation across different age groups, genders, income levels, maybe race, maybe geographic location, and a number of different other perhaps so-called demographics. Finally, let's explore cluster sampling. In this method, the population is divided into clusters, typically based on geographic regions. Random clusters are then selected and all members within those clusters are surveyed. Cluster sampling is cost-effective and simplifies logistics, making it suitable for large dispersed populations. However, it can introduce cluster-specific biases if the selected clusters are not fully representative of the entire population. An example of cluster sampling is a multinational research project that examines urban versus rural consumer behavior by selecting specific urban and rural areas in each country for detailed study. I color-coded the bullets on this slide, as you can see, with the green being the core sampling techniques, and then added two blue-coded bullets for systematic sampling and multi-stage sampling. Let's look closer at those 5 techniques on the next set of screens. A simple random sample is a randomly selected subset of a population. In this sampling method, each member of the population has an exactly equal chance of being selected. This method is the most straightforward of all the probability sampling methods, since it involves a single random selection and requires little advanced knowledge about the population. Because it uses randomization, any research performed on this sample should have high internal and external validity and be at lower risk for research biases like sampling bias and selection bias. For example, a global tech company wants to evaluate customer satisfaction, back to my favorite outcome metric, I guess, with its new smartphone. They compile a list of customers, all customers who purchased a phone worldwide in the past 3 months. Using a random number generator, they select a subset of 1,000 customers to survey. This simple random sampling method ensures that each customer has an equal chance of being chosen, providing unbiased and representative insights into overall customer satisfaction. We move on to systematic sampling. That's a probability sampling method in which researchers select members of the population at regular intervals, k intervals, determined in advance. If the population order is random or random-like, say alphabetical, then this method will give you a representative sample that can be used to draw conclusions about your population of interest. For example, a multinational apparel brand wants to survey customer satisfaction again across its global stores. They create a list of customers who made purchases in the past month, sorted alphabetically. To select the sample, they chose every 10th customer on the list, k equals 10 in that particular case then. This systematic sampling method ensures a representative sample, allowing the brand to accurately gauge overall customer satisfaction and identify areas for improvement in different markets. Back to stratified sample in a little bit more detail. You can see details on the bottom of the screen as well as the process going through from one step to the next step. But in a stratified sample, researchers divide a population into homogeneous subpopulations called strata again, the plural of stratum, based on specific characteristics. It could be race, gender, identity, some other form of identity, location, and so on. Every member of the population studied should be in exactly one stratum. Each stratum is then sampled using another probability sampling method, such as cluster sampling or simple random sampling, allowing then researchers to estimate statistical measures for each subpopulation. For example, an international cosmetics company wants to understand customer preferences for a new skincare product. They divide their global customer base into strata based on age groups. It could be 18 to 25, 26 to 35, 36 to 45, maybe 46 and older. Within each age group, they randomly select participants for the survey. This stratified sampling ensures that each age group is proportionally represented, allowing the company to analyze preferences and tailor marketing strategies for different age demographics effectively. In cluster sampling, researchers divide a population into smaller groups known as clusters. They then randomly select among these clusters to form a sample. Cluster sampling is a method of probability sampling that is often used to study large populations, particularly those that are widely geographically dispersed. And researchers usually use pre-existing units, such as schools or cities, as their clusters. And I've spelled out those sort of descriptions that I've talked about for the last several slides at the bottom, so you have those, but the examples are of course more taken from my background and my interest and so forth. So this example, for example, a global fast food chain wants to evaluate the effectiveness of a new menu item in different countries. They divide the worldwide locations into clusters based on cities. They randomly select several cities, those are the ones that we call clusters then, and then survey all customers at the chain's restaurants within those cities. This cluster sampling method allows the company to gather data efficiently from diverse geographical areas without the need for extensive resources to reach every location globally. In multi-stage sampling, which you have an illustration of here as well, or multi-stage cluster sampling, as you may call it, you draw a sample from a population using smaller and smaller groups or units at each stage. It's often used to collect data from a large geographically spread group of people in national surveys. For example, a global electronics company wants to assess the usage patterns of its new tablet across different countries. They start by randomly selecting several countries. First stage, that would be the first stage in this case. Within each country, they randomly select several cities. That would be the second stage. In each selected city, they randomly choose households. That would be the third stage. And then finally, they survey individuals within those households. This multi-stage sampling method allows the company to efficiently gather detailed data from a broad, geographically diverse population. Every one of these sampling approaches allows the company to also educate potential customers. And that's a key one here that we oftentimes maybe overlook. Signaling theory is what we talk about theoretically, but we can also use sampling and, more importantly, the surveys that go to those samples for educational purposes. That education is an important aspect of marketing to the right target market and segment. In effect, educating customers while also learning more about them via research is a powerful international combo. And that's what the Shep Hyken single panel comic talks about in this particular case. So check that out a little bit more in detail than what I just presented it as. Ensuring that research samples accurately represent diverse populations is critical for producing valid and generalizable findings. In, of course, international marketing research, but in marketing research in general. However, sampling in heterogeneous international contexts, which they oftentimes are, heterogeneous as opposed to countries are generally a little bit more homogeneous, presents a lot of different challenges, such as varying cultural norms and demographic structures. Sample equivalence involves ensuring that samples from different cultural or demographic groups are comparable in key characteristics. This is vital for making valid cross-cultural comparisons and avoiding biases that could distort research outcomes. For example, in a global survey on consumer behavior, ensuring sample equivalence might involve making sure that age, gender, and income groups are proportionally represented in each country's sample. Techniques for creating representative samples include stratified sampling, quota sampling, and multi-stage sampling. We're talking about these and many other techniques in the next session on data collection methods in IMR, so stay tuned for more of those there as well. We're going to have 20 of the primary and 20 of the secondary and whole host of different other things that go into the toolkit that we're building, hopefully in this class. For now, let's go back to the sample equivalence we talked about. Conducting pilot studies helps refine sampling techniques and ensures they accurately capture diverse populations. For example, pre-testing survey instruments across different countries can help ensure cultural and contextual relevance. Applying statistical weights can adjust for any imbalances in sample representation. Researchers might use weighting to correct for underrepresented demographic groups as a part of that process. Identifying and addressing common obstacles such as logistical issues, cultural differences, and non-response problems is essential for achieving accurate and reliable sampling in international research. Logistical challenges here involve coordinating data collection across multiple countries, which includes dealing with varying infrastructure, time zones, and geographic dispersion, of course. These issues can lead to delays, increased cost, and inconsistent data collection practices. To overcome these challenges, researchers should implement robust project management tools and establish local partnerships to streamline coordination and data collection processes. For example, using local field teams can ensure timely and accurate data collection in each country and each region. Cultural differences encompass or include, I should say, and a better Swedish to English translation, variations in norms, values, and communication styles. These cultural issues we've talked about several times, they can affect participants' understanding and responses. These differences may lead to misinterpretations of questions, biased responses, and difficulties in achieving sample equivalence. So we talk about sample equivalence, metric equivalence, or measurement equivalence, and construct equivalence. We have different equivalences we talk about, but let's stay with the sample equivalence here. To address these issues, researchers should conduct cultural sensitivity training for their teams and adapt research instruments to align with local norms and languages. This approach again helps in obtaining more accurate and culturally relevant data. You see that some of these things are coming back over and over again in different ways and different tangents affecting the research process. Non-response problems occur when participants do not respond or drop out of the study, leading to skewed results and reduced representativeness. Non-response bias affects the validity and reliability of research findings, obviously, because we simply don't know what they may want, need, or think. To enhance response rates, researchers should use multiple contact methods, provide incentives if possible, and ensure that anonymous surveys can be taken to encourage participation. For instance, offering smaller rewards or ensuring confidentiality can significantly improve participation rates. Understanding and addressing potential sampling errors. Now we're getting into a little bit more of the detail of the sampling aspect of it is of course essential for enhancing the validity and reliability of international research. Again, leading to more accurate and actionable insights if we do it correctly. Simplistically, sampling errors occur when the sample does not accurately represent the population, leading to biased results. Understanding these errors is crucial for ensuring the validity and reliability of research findings. As a little bit of a footnote here, usually survey research has more than 50% error variance in whatever constructs are measured with whatever scales are measured. So we have to tease out that error variance before we can look at cause and effect and other aspects of relationships. Selection bias occurs when certain groups are systematically excluded or overrepresented. This leads to unrepresentative samples and skewed results. For example, if a survey on internet usage only includes urban areas, it may overlook rural populations who use the internet differently. A sampling frame error arises when the list or database that we start with, from which a sample is drawn, does not accurately reflect the population. This results in the omission of significant segments of the population in really bad cases, and probably always to some degree. An example is using outdated phone directories for sampling, which may exclude younger demographics who primarily use mobile phones. Non-response bias happens when individuals who do not respond differ significantly from those who do. This reduces the representativeness of the sample and the generalizability of the findings. For instance, if a health survey has a low response rate from a particular age group, the results may not accurately reflect the health status of that group. Sampling errors can compromise internal validity by affecting the study's ability to establish causal relationships within the sample. It can also limit external validity, reducing the extent to which findings can be generalized to that broader population that we are trying to generalize to. Sampling errors can also introduce variability in results, making it difficult to replicate findings across different studies or populations, or if we do cross-section type studies, see it over time, one cross-sectional study to another. There are strategies to minimize sampling errors. We're going to do a few for right now, not in depth, but a few. Use stratified or random sampling methods. I like the stratified methods I've said before to ensure diverse and representative samples. Conduct pilot studies before that to identify and address potential sampling issues before full-scale research. And employ strategies like follow-ups, incentives, and simplifying the response process to mitigate non-response bias. Make it easy to do, hard not to do, as I keep saying, and I introduced a little while back. The last three screens became technical, so let's go with a few brief case studies of real companies again. Got Procter & Gamble, Unilever, Coca-Cola, Nestle, and Diageo. That's a tough one for me to say. In India, we talk about Procter & Gamble in this particular case. The challenge was their diverse and vast population with varying literacy levels. The solution that P&G had was they used stratified sampling to ensure representation from different regions and socioeconomic groups, and employed local enumerators to assist with data collection. This approach helped P&G gather accurate insights into consumer preferences across India's varied demographic landscape. Unilever in Brazil, here the challenge was geographical diversity and high urbanization. The solution was to implement cluster sampling in urban and rural areas to capture varied consumer behaviors and preferences. This strategy provided Unilever with comprehensive market insights, enabling them to tailor their products and marketing strategies effectively. And Coke in China is interesting. Here we're talking about the challenge being navigating cultural diversity and regional differences. The solution was to conduct quota sampling to ensure adequate representation of different demographic segments. Local field researchers familiar with the regional dialects and customs were used to improve data collection accuracy, allowing Coca-Cola to better understand and cater to diverse consumer needs. Nestle in Africa, to go around the world as we oftentimes do in these examples. I like doing that. Hopefully that's beneficial and interesting for everyone. For Nestle in Africa, we talked about high economic disparity and varied access to infrastructure. As the challenge, the solution became applied multi-stage modeling to first identify key urban and rural clusters, followed by stratified sampling within those clusters to capture diverse consumer profiles. This approach enabled Nestle to gather detailed insights into consumer behaviors across different socioeconomic segments. And then in Nigeria, I have a hard time saying this company's name, Diageo. Political instability and varied accessibility, as oftentimes is the case in many of there are 54 or 55 countries in Africa, depending on who's counting. There's actually a sort of a debate about the number of countries, which is what, but there are 54 or 55. I generally like to go with 54, and many of them do have political instability and perhaps varied accessibility along with the infrastructure. And they employed as a solution here local partnerships for data collection, leveraging local knowledge to navigate logistical challenges. They involved robust training programs for enumerators that were implemented to ensure data accuracy, allowing the company to obtain reliable market insights despite the challenging environment. Each of the companies successfully employs multi-country sampling strategies regularly that we talked about. For me, the top three strategies for multi-country sampling are to use what we call harmonized sampling frameworks, invoke local partnerships and expertise, and I've said localization a lot, and do some form of technology-enhanced data collection, even though we do have drawbacks with that, perhaps in the 54 or so countries in Africa that I mentioned, or many of them at least. Harmonized sampling frameworks, here we develop a standardized sampling framework that aligns with local context while maintaining overall consistency. Use stratified sampling to account for regional variations within each country, ensuring that all significant subgroups are represented. For example, implementing a global health survey with consistent stratification criteria for age, gender, and socioeconomic status across different countries. For local partnerships and expertise, the idea is to collaborate with local research firms or academic institutions, perhaps a little bit self-serving, I understand, then to leverage their knowledge of regional nuances and cultural norms. This partnership helps in adapting sampling methods to local realities and improves participant engagement and data accuracy. For example, partnering with local universities to conduct consumer behavior studies, utilizing their insights into regional demographics and logistical challenges. And then technology enhanced data collection, even with some of the limitations, involves using technology to streamline and standardize data collection processes. Online survey platforms, mobile data collection tools, and centralized data management systems ensure consistency and allow for real-time monitoring and adjustments. We're way past the paper and pen kind of service, so the data come in when the data come in. For example, using mobile apps for real-time data collection in rural and urban areas if we do those things, ensure data consistency and enabling swift resolution of any discrepancies that we may run into. A lot of the recommendations so far have centered on local context and local expertise. Adapting sampling methods to fit diverse local and regional contexts is crucial for obtaining accurate, reliable data in international research and respecting cultural norms, economic conditions, and political environments. For cultural context adaptation, we adjust sampling techniques to respect local customs, traditions, and social norms. We engage local cultural experts, or we probably always should, to ensure questions and methods are appropriate, enhancing respondent comfort with the survey or data collection that we do and data reliability overall. As an example, we could start by using focus groups and communal societies where group consensus is valued, ensuring culturally sensitive question phrasing. For economic context adaptation, we tailor sampling methods to reflect economic conditions such as varying levels of income and access to technology. Technology is a big one there, of course. Consider mixed mode approaches combining face-to-face, online, and mobile data collection to reach all socioeconomic segments. For example, in low-income regions, supplementing online surveys with in-person interviews to include participants without internet access would be possibly a great addition to the collection methods. For political context adaptation, we navigate political sensitivities by understanding the regulatory environment and potential risks. We can obtain necessary permissions and adapt methods to ensure participant safety and compliance with local laws by doing so. For example, in politically unstable areas, and there are many of those in the world now, using anonymous surveys and secure data storage to protect respondent confidentiality and reduce risk is probably a must. As in earlier sessions, it's important to connect the dots to ethics. Addressing ethical concerns in sampling is fundamental to conducting fair, inclusive, and credible research. Researchers must strive to minimize bias, and I keep saying that also over and over again, avoid discrimination and ensure informed consent. Sampling bias occurs when certain groups are systematically excluded or overrepresented in the sample again. It can skew research findings and lead to invalid conclusions, undermining the credibility of the study. For example, using only urban participants in a study meant to represent a national population. And I used the urban-rural tag team partnership before in a similar example. Discrimination in sampling involves unfair treatment of certain groups based on characteristics like race, gender, or socioeconomic status, or any variable that should not really come into the mix. Ensuring diverse and inclusive samples is crucial to avoid reinforcing existing inequalities, for example, excluding non-English speakers from a survey in a multilingual country, or any language speaker from any other language speaker being excluded. Obtaining informed consent is essential to respect participants' autonomy and rights. Participants must be fully informed about the study's purpose, procedures, risks, and benefits before agreeing to take part. That's just a fair way of doing it. For example, providing clear, accessible consent forms in multiple languages kicks that off nicely. In some way, if certain people get asked too many questions, the sample and data become biased. This single panel comic talks about too many questions more generally. It may seem innocent to ask more questions, but it may also skew the sample and the data. And of course, for the respondent, it's annoying to be asked questions that are not relevant, that have been asked before. And I think you probably noticed over the last 10 years that we get fewer and fewer questions, but at some point, if we have one question to symbolize, for example, customer satisfaction, it's just simply not reliable and valid. There's too much error variance in that particular one question, but we also can't ask 100. So there's a happy medium to be found there, and this single panel comic from Shep Hyken talks about What unnecessary or repetitive processes should be changed or eliminated to create a better customer experience? He's going for the customer journey and customer experience more generally, but obviously we don't want to ask a lot of different questions that do not apply to what we're trying to get done in the exchange. As we get close to ending this session, a few takeaways for best practices for sampling and international marketing research. Perhaps a top 5, if you will, on this particular one, in no particular order though. Understand local context, research and understand cultural, economic, and political context to tailor sampling methods appropriately, ensuring relevance and accuracy in data collection. Engage local experts, collaborate with local researchers or consultants who are familiar with regional nuances and can provide valuable insights into effective sampling strategies. And then I keep harping on use stratified sampling. That means implement stratified sampling to ensure that the representation of key subgroups within the subpopulation at large are in the sample. That would enhance accuracy and inclusiveness of the sample, of course. Pilot testing before we do any full-scale testing. Conduct pilot tests in each region to refine sampling methods and address any potential issues before full-scale data collection. And then ensure ethical practices, adhere to ethical standards by minimizing bias, avoiding discrimination, and securing informed consent to maintain the integrity and fairness of the research. Finally, for this session, we come to another essay assignment. From the California Management Review this time, we looked at customer expectations. So briefly, skyrocketing customer expectations have served as a call for action for companies to constantly do better, but have customer expectations climbed that sharply? We analyzed more than 10 million customer surveys and looked at trends over 30 years. And we looked specifically at which industries customers expect the most and least. The fallacy of we always exceed expectations, that's just not optimally a good likelihood of happening. It's not a good promise to have. What companies can expect from customer expectations more generally, and balancing customer expectations and customer satisfaction. The assignment for this one is loosely titled Analyzing Sampling and Customer Expectations. The prompt is to select a company with headquarters in Asia this time. So we're moving you around to another part of the world and analyze how that particular company goes about sampling for markets in Asia to understand the customer's needs and wants, but also use the sampling and research to set customer expectations correctly. So the educational portion is important to me as well. Integrate the 3 to 4 content topics from the session that we just did on sampling in diverse international markets and the CMR article that we titled Our Customer Expectations Skyrocketing. What can companies do? As always, target somewhere in the vicinity of 500 words, but we have flexibility on that. Just sort of do the assignment with the number of words that you think it takes, more or less. Normally I start the outro music here, but I have a little bit more of tidbits to go through, so I'll start in a few seconds instead. As we get deeper into the material in international marketing research and some analytics, you will notice more and more, and I've said a little bit, but more and more overlap between topics, reinforcement of practices, and a toolkit, I hope, being built for how to conduct international marketing research. Until next time, have fun with this assignment. This assignment of combining international sampling and customer expectations is not as obvious of an integration as the earlier assignment, but it makes sense. Check it out. I think you will like it. Companies use international marketing research to understand the market better, but also to use the so-called signaling theory that I mentioned to set customer expectations that make sense for the market. So we use signaling theory to make sense with the expectations that customers and other stakeholders perhaps should have of a product or service or a company or a brand. And that's important as maybe education, signaling theory, setting expectations, and of course, we do international marketing research to understand the customers and stakeholders better. So in that sense, the sampling we choose or companies choose for diverse international markets is incredibly important for a variety of reasons, going actually pretty far beyond just understanding the needs and wants of customers. And here's the outro music.